Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial video on the tutorial series of object-oriented programming in Java. So we're just talking more on the interface aspects of syntax and semantics in Java programming language. So please check our previous couple of tutorials talking about more on the interface on the single inheritance and multiple inheritance. In this tutorial video we'll talk about how do we actually inherit both the class as well as the interface. So let's begin by starting a new project. So inheritance, both inheritance meaning both interface as well as the class object. So now our project is ready. Let's create another package which will hold the class object. So we create a package called class pack. In the class pack we'll create a class class programming. So we have the class object now. So what to do with the class object? For example, we have, let's say, private int num, and we have a public method for let's say get num. This is the getter of the num variable, which is actually the int. So actually we are getting num, so we have to put int. So let's have the setter, getter setter for the private variable called int. So set method doesn't return anything, so we have the void, and we this num. So usually you should use the scope operator called this, so that it greatly improves the readability of the program. So we have now a private variable with the data type called int. The variable name is num. So we have set function, we have get function, methods for the variable called num. So you can have a default constructor if you want, just to make sure we are following the default constructor method and no other confusion happens. So this is the default constructor, meaning when we make the instance of the class, if we make this, so this is the constructor that has actually been invoked. So we know by default that this is the constructor that has actually been used, and we can put whatever we want inside the body of the constructor, meaning inside the curly braces, or we don't have to put it and keep this as empty. So it depends upon the developer or the programmer what they want as their default constructor. So this is actually the default constructor by rule in the Java programming language, in the name of syntax and semantics in the Java programming language. So now we have a class package, we have a class program. Let's now create a inheritance one. First let's create a package, inherit pack. So in the inherit pack we'll have actually the package. It creates a class, but we have to create inherit program. So inherit program is actually the default actually is class in this IDE, which is Netbeans IDE 10 from Apache, but I think maybe the commercial, like the JetBrains Intellij might provide directly interface, but right now we don't have the direct default file created in the inheritance in the interface inheritance hierarchy. So now we have the interface. So this tutorial video is all about how do we inherit both class object and as well as the interface object. So is it really possible to do in Java? The answer is yes. But there are two keywords: extends for class inheritance and implements for the class, meaning for the interface. So class we already created. So this is the body of the class, which is public, visible to the entire project. Now we are trying to create a um, interface. So let's create print message. This is just the declaration. Interface is just the declaration, and whichever the class that actually inherits the interface will be implementing this method with the annotation called @override. So now let's create the real package, which is which will have the final class which inherits both the class object as well as the interface object. So what you can do is class block final proc. Let's create the default constructor. Final proc. So now we have a class object called final proc, which will actually inherit a class. Inherit a class is the keyword called extends in Java. So what we have to inherit with the keyword called extends, which is actually a class. So we'll go for class proc. So we have successfully imported the class proc object and implements the interface, which is inherit proc. So inherit proc is the interface, class proc is the class object. So we have inheriting the class object with the keyword called extends and implementing the inheritance with the keyword called implements. So this is the another form of multiple inheritance, but this is much more specific, where we have multiple inheritance, where the class is actually doing the multiple inheritance here. One is inheriting class, and another second one is the inheriting the interface. Now we have to implement the methods of the inherit proc, which is the print message. So let's print the system.out. So use the scope operator called this, and we'll go for get num, which is coming from. So remember this print message, we are using the annotation called @override, meaning at the rate of @override. Print message is coming from inherit proc. So inherit proc as the print message method, and the class proc will have the num. We have the getter called get num. So in the final program we are inheriting the class object with the keyword called extends, and we are implementing the methods as declared inside the body of the in the interface class, and it is inherited with the keyword called implements, which is the print message, and we are trying to print the value of num in the, which is actually the num is coming from the class proc. But first we have to initialize the value of the num. So we just put a default value of 100, and now we are collecting. We are, remember, we are doing in the print message, which is coming from the interface. So going to the top, the main method, let's create an instance of final proc. So we have importing the final prog from final pack. Final pack is the package, final prog is the Java file. This is the inheritance hierarchy with a keyword called import. This is the standard Java thing. So from FP object, meaning the the class that actually inherited a class and also inherited inheritance, inherited interface. So we have both class object as well as the interface object in the object called final prog with the key name, with the variable name called FP. So it has a method called print message. So now let's run the program. So we got the value, num value equals 100, because in the final prog we set the value of 100. The num actually resides in the class object called class prog, and the print message method we are overriding, which was present in the inherit prog, which is actually the interface. So the interface will not have a body, it's just a declaration of the methods. So in the final prog we implemented the body of the print message. We set the value of num, which is in class prog, because we are inheriting, and the class prog is actually having the access specifier called public. So we are able to access all the methods which is public in the class prog, which is the getter setter method for the variable called num. So first we set the value of num, and we are displaying the value of num to the console. So now we have successfully done multiple inheritance in a different way for the class. Remember, class object cannot have multiple inheritance, but it can implement it can have multiple inheritance in the form of interface. And this is another example where we are having multiple inheritance, which is class object and the interface object. So this is another form of multiple inheritance, inheriting one class object and one interface object. So we have successfully demonstrated that this is actually possible in the Java programming language. So please check our previous tutorial video where we are talking about multiple inheritance in the interface object only. So this tutorial video we are demonstrating both interface and the class. Inherit prog is interface and class prog is class object. So class object inherited using the keyword called extends, and inheritance with respect to the interface is inherited with the keyword called implements. So there has two parts in Java. One is known as the class object, another is known as the interface object. Interface objects supports multiple inheritance directly in the interface path. In the class inheritance path there is only one inheritance allowed, but you can mix both inheritance of class object and the interface object, so that we'll have a multiple inheritance with respect to the class object, and we can have multiple inheritance in the class object which is more than one interface. So at least there should be one interface and one class for multiple inheritance, or there should be more than one interfaces that is now inherited by the class object in the domain of multiple inheritance. So now we have successfully demonstrated that it actually works and possible in Java. So I think I will end this tutorial video. Please stay tuned for the additional tutorial videos coming in this series, object-oriented programming in Java, especially targeted for beginners. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching. Bye.